Chickasaw and Choctaw Joint Employee, officed at the South Central Climate Science Center in Norman, Oklahoma. And I'm going to talk about some of the regional climate partnerships and what their different roles are. Okay, so a little bit about my position first. The way I explain my job is, one, I'm a matchmaker. I take the tribal staff and the climate staff and I bring them together to work on projects and go after funding of various sorts, any kind of funding, BIA, CSC funding, all sorts of funding. Another aspect of my job is I bring trainings for tribal staff, like this one today. So we bring in trainings. I've brought in 16 trainings in the last 3 years to our region for tribal staff. And then I also do youth programs. We bring in, we get to go out to youth festivals. We've been out to the Wichita several times and to the Choctaws, Jonas Academy and different things like that. So we get to go out and do youth activities and teach the youth about climate science and do science experiments and things. So that's a fun aspect of my job. So a little bit about the climate science centers. I'm going to talk about them broadly. There are 8 climate science centers, so there's one for your region. This is a map of the 8. The stars indicate where their hosts are. So for the South Central, the University of Oklahoma is our host. And the circles are the consortium members, or typically the universities that we work with. They are under the Department of Interior, under the U.S. Geological Survey. And again, there are 8, but we have what we call fuzzy boundaries. And so we're encouraged to work together because climate change is not just a regional issue. And so we work together on various things across those jurisdictions. So for the South Central Climate Science Center, our region is Oklahoma, New Mexico, Texas, and Louisiana. And so I work with 68 tribes in our region. A little bit about our structures. So the USGS is our manager, and we have staff located with us. And then we have a host university and a consortium. And our consortium, like I said, consists of, and I'll talk about that, usually of the climate scientists that are coming right out of academics and things like that. We have a stakeholder advisory council of federal agencies that oversee and determine what our science priorities for our region are. We have a science implementation panel too that determines more on the local scale and what gets funded and things like that. Our science planning, we have sort of a short-term and a long-term, so 1 year, year-to-year type stuff, and then we have a 5-year plan as well. And of course, we offer government-to-government consultation as well. So a little bit about an example for the South Central Climate Science Center. Our universities, as I said, the host is the University of Oklahoma. Then we have Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, and LSU, Louisiana State. We are the only climate science center that has tribal sovereign nations on our consortium, and we have Chickasaw Nation and Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. And then we have a federal agency. We have NOAA's Geophysics Dynamics Lab out of Princeton that does a lot of our climate modeling and downscaling. We also are the only climate science center at this time that has full-time tribal liaisons officed at the Climate Science Center, but there are plans to have tribal liaisons at the others, so if you are from another region. So a little bit about what our role is. We really are about providing the climate science and doing climate science research and working with the climate scientists and providing that climate science to the users. So we do a lot of the global climate modeling and the downscaling and how that data integration into various other models such as ecological models. And then we're big on best practices of how to use that climate data and what uses you can use it for different things and things like that. Then the second key partnership is what we call the Landscape Conservation Cooperatives, or the LCCs. This is a map of the LCCs. There are 22 of them. These guys are more ecosystem or ecological zones based. So as you can see, their regions are fairly large as well. So for our region, the South Central Climate Science Center, we have 6 landscape conservation cooperatives that we work with. And this is a map of the tribal lands and the landscape conservations for our region. So as you can see, there with the tribal lands where your landscape conservation cooperative is. And I'd be more than happy to share. These slides are going to be on the website as well. A little bit about their structure and organization. They are either under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or the Bureau of Rec. They have steering committees consisted of more of the resource managers from different organizations, whether it's at the federal, state, or local. Many of them have tribal representatives on their steering committees, and then landowners and NGOs. They also have a science team that determines what their science priorities are and things like that. And then another key aspect of the landscape conservation cooperatives is they're international, so they often are encouraged to work across borders as well. So that's an interesting challenge for these groups. So a little bit about the landscape conservation cooperatives. They work on landscape scale type things. And they determine what their priority habitats and species for their landscape, for their jurisdiction. And so they really look at things at a larger scale, large ecoregions or watersheds. It's not really local based or project based. They're looking into the entire landscape and how we manage on a larger scale. So example, they look at things like amounts of acres. One example I give is a certain forest type. So let's say we look at cross timbers. They're looking at the amount of acres and how that's changing. They're looking at the configurations of those things. How big are the patch sizes? What compositions do we have and connectivity of those things? They're looking at the conditions. How healthy are these conditions in these forests and things like that. So they're looking at the water quality and quantity issues. So this is sort of what the way they operate, their purpose intent is looking at conservation at a larger scale. I wanted to provide a couple example projects from the Gulf Coastal Plains and Ozarks LCC. One of their projects includes surveying winter waterfowl and migration patterns in response to weather patterns and how that's changing over time. They also have a project where they're creating an alligator gar spatial habitat model by mapping out their habitats and the suitability and monitoring that and the uses of floodplains and things like that. So that's an example of what the landscape conservation cooperatives do. They're very much habitat and species based. They're conservation groups. So a little bit about their role is they're key in integrating the climate science into the conservation practices and working with the resource managers. They also, the other way around, they provide the climate science centers their climate science needs and interests, and so they communicate back to us what's going on in the landscape. We're supposed to be working together to determine how plants and wildlife are being impacted by climate change, and funding and leveraging projects in that way as well. So these guys really are the key partner in providing assistance for your vulnerability assessments of plants and wildlife. And so they often will matchmake you with the right types of people for that certain species and things like that. So keep that in mind. Then the third key partnership is what we call the USDA Climate Hubs. They're fairly new, and this is a map of their regions. So there's 7 of them currently, and they really focus on climate change for agricultural type things, whether that's production or rural economic development type things. They really are about the on-the-ground farmers, ranchers, landowners, those types of things. So they're a key contact as well if you're interested in more on the agricultural impacts. The fourth key partnership that I want to talk about is what we call our NOAA RESAs, or the Regional Integrated Science and Assessments Teams, or programs. There are 11 of these, and this is a map there of where they're located. And they really focus on the emphasis of assessing what our stakeholders' needs and communicating that back to the other groups. So they're out there assessing, what are the agricultural stakeholders interested in and what are they needing? Are they needing how to manage their grasslands or, and things like that. They really are focused on producing tools and products for decision makers and things like that. So they've got lots of great tools and resources on, and so then they really are about how the science is used in making decisions. We work with them in many ways as well, so they're a key partner. So this is sort of a diagram to explain some of this. So you have your scientist, and then you have the Climate Science Center and the RISAs communicating with the landscape conservation cooperatives and the climate hubs. And then that goes to the end users and the decision makers and policy makers. So we all work together, and we all have our specific role that we play in the bigger picture. So for the Climate Science Center, we have lots of partners we work with. We have our 7 consortium members that, if we talked about, the universities and the tribes. We have 6 LCCs in our region that we work with. We have our 68 tribes that we outreach and work with. We have the DOI programs and agencies. We have the water science centers and different centers. We have the USDA climate hubs that in our region. I think we have 3. And then we have the NOAA RISAs. We have 2 of those in our region. And then, of course, we work with our state natural resource management agencies as well. So we partner. That's a big part of what we do. So we do a lot of coordination. And so this is a table showing you how much we communicate with all these different partners on a regular basis. We have lots of calls, and we have lots of communication, and we also have several of these key partners co-located with us in our different offices, and so we work with them on a regular basis and see them every day. We have joint funding projects. We work together and often leverage things for different grants and projects all the time. We also have cross-membership. We all sit on each other's committees and boards and calls, and so we are all engaged and aware of what everybody's doing on a regular basis. So I wanted to provide an example of a project that's developing of how this all works and why this works well. There's this project going on, we call it the Two Basins Project. It's with the Rio Grande and the Red River, and basically we're creating this forum of all these different partners for these watershed basins that will determine what the stakeholders' needs are and guide the research of how climate is going to impact these main water basins in our region. So again, large-scale type things. I mean, we're talking the Red River Basin all the way from New Mexico through Oklahoma and many tribal jurisdictions to Louisiana to the Gulf. So several statewide and many jurisdictional issues and things like that. So this is an example of how we work together for developing larger scale projects. I also wanted to mention that on the website, and that's going to be available, I have a handout on these partnerships, and I also have all their contacts as well. So if you need to get in touch with a certain landscape conservation cooperative or anything, that will be available as well. Feel free to contact me or if you find you need some partnerships.